Hello, one and all. Welcome back to the Chaos Engine podcast. This is Chris. I run shows on this bad boy, and typically I'd be introducing the next episode, which would be an interview, but unfortunately, I was trying to fix the audio from our interview guest, Cody, and I wasn't able to, and it seems like there might have been something on his end that messed it up, so we are going to postpone that interview. We're going to redo it so you can hear from him. And actually hear from him instead of being chopped up. So in the meantime, I need to put together an episode. And now you're probably thinking, hey, Chris, why don't you just do a normal episode, asshole? Well, let me tell you, it takes a long time to edit an episode, and I fly out in the morning to Las Vegas. So I don't have time to edit an episode tonight and wake up and go to the airport. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to do an episode talking about how I plan out a campaign, a session, a scenario that I've got in my head, and kind of go through the steps that maybe you'll find interesting and, maybe something new that you haven't done before. I don't know. I just thought it might be an interesting idea to do. So before we get into that, I want to thank our Patreon individuals for their continued support. And you've heard their names, and you're going to hear them again. So sit down and buckle up. We got Taylor, Drowen, Miles, Randy, Yam, Colby, Thomas, Randy G, Laszlo, Hovo, H-O-V-O, Jeremy, Ben, Garth, and Tyler. Thank you guys for your continued support of this show. It means a whole lot to us. And, that's all I got. Normally I'd say something about the episode we're jumping into, but I don't have that. So all I have is just me. I'm doing this completely stream of conscience. I don't have a whole ton of notes. We're just going to dive into this, and I'm just going to go off the top of the old domester and get this information to you. So first off, I want to talk about running Delta Green. As I did with the first season, I did two kind of scenarios that were linked in, that were kind of bled out of Music from a Darkened Room, and I wanted to talk about how I went about constructing those. So, Delta Green's a lot different than, say, Pathfinder, D&D. I think that's pretty obvious. And it takes a special way to kind of plan out the events of those games, because you're not necessarily throwing like monsters at them. And it takes a long time to deprogram your brain from thinking about things in a D&D style. It took me a long, long time, especially 4th edition when I started playing D&D. It really took like Dungeon World and Savage World were two systems that kind of broke my brain. It's like, what? I don't have to have a fight every 5 seconds. This isn't how the game doesn't go this way. It was really cool. And it felt liberating to be able to sit down and say, I can tell a story and I can have these moments and we get to dictate that action. It's not, well, I have an XP budget. What monsters can I put in there that make sense to what I'm doing right now that could be a challenge for them? So you're looking at Delta Green as a game to GM. It's more, to me, in my opinion, it's about the tone that you're setting at the table. The rules are there, they're very simple, but it's what are you trying to convey at that table? What are the moments and the impacts that you're trying to hit in that story to get your players invested, to get them scared, to get them on the edge of their seats, to make them fearful for their characters? It is a very deadly game, as you've seen through all of our Dark Thoughts. We had multiple character deaths. That's just how Delta Green goes. And so when you're approaching building a scenario for that, think about what your end goal is. So for instance, as I sat down and I started to design part 2 and part 3 of season 1, I wanted to have the events kind of fold out of the scenario we'd already run, which is Music from a Darkened Room. I had this idea that not necessarily Nyarlathotep would be pissed off at this group for what they did, because he's a god. He's like, we're fucking ants to him. But there would be a group who worshipped him in that town of Ellensburg, and they would be angry that they lost something there, that maybe they felt like they dishonored him. And so that was kind of the impetus for part 2. Spoilers, if you haven't got through Dark Thoughts. Probably should have said that up front. And so as I started to go through and I started to develop these things, I wanted to have a couple key things that stood out to me. I really like the idea of, obviously we have Nyarlathotep. He's this, he's described as this kind of like ebony being made of like obsidian with just these like eyes that stare at you. So I really like the idea of having these shadows as kind of a tease or like a callback to the group in these various spots that they would know were kind of like, I don't want to say necessarily, it was basically like the cult of Nyarlathotep taunting the group of like, we know what you did. And this is our kind of like way to show you we're aware of you. We know what you are. And so that was kind of the big impetus is like, okay, there's a different cult that is within the confines of this town. We have expanded that it's just not this house. Maybe this house was consecrated, certainly was, to Nyarlathotep. But there's other people in this town that are probably tied to this. There's got to be individuals who did this. We have the history of the house. We know all the people who did this. Why wouldn't that have spread out? Why wouldn't there be other members of this community who would, be okay with this? And so as I started the build out from there, it was really just that of like, okay, I love Ellensburg, one of my favorite places in the world. It's a very chill, laid back town when I went to school there. And I fell in love with just the just easygoing nature of it. And there are some key elements. There's like, okay, we need to have some people who are big in this community. We need to have major set pieces for noticeable buildings. If you drive through Ellensburg, you could say, hey, that's this place. And I did that. I took actual businesses in Ellensburg, changed the names, but their locations are right there. You could drive down Main Street and you could see the furniture shop that I based this campaign, part 2 off of. You could see all of those things. And so it was very important to me to kind of touch upon those bases of like show a lot of the downtown of Ellensburg and start to flesh out these characters and give them really their ulterior motives. And that's kind of the other big part when I'm planning Delta Green is what are the motives of my enemies? I don't want to craft a scenario based off of everything that the players are doing. I want to have a strong enough, I'm trying to think of the best word here, a strong enough bad guy, a strong enough reason for this person to keep going, and then change how they interact with the players once they've butted up against that. And that was a really big thing for me with especially going into this Delta Green and recording the podcast was I wanted to break away from how I normally planned out sessions, which were, all right, I'm going to do a bunch of stuff, and then depending on what the characters do, I'm going to just tailor the story to what they did and kind of carve that path down there. And with this, I was really trying to, I have these set bad guys. They have machinations that they're doing. If the players run into them, great. If they don't, great. I don't care. The players choose their path. And obviously there are going to be some pieces of information that have to get out there. So for instance, we have like Mercer Crest. She was she was the leader of all of this evil cabal. And then you also had, like Laura Rustin, who was this kind of up and coming member of the group who was fighting for power for her. And depending on how the players go, they could turn either against each other and maybe work with them and kind of build this camaraderie or like maybe a standstill with this cult. Now, obviously didn't go that way, but that was kind of the underlying message, and I was trying to convey that with certain points. And the other players, obviously, everybody had a purpose. The end goal for me was that I like the idea. I envisioned this scene at the rodeo and this kind of just giant sea of individuals and Laura getting up in front of them. And essentially all these people have been drinking this beer that's been tainted, and she gives this speech and she utters these words and she says something, and all of these people just blip out of existence, or they all just go into a frenzy and die, and just a sea of people. And I thought that'd be really a terrifying thought of, almost like a terrorist attack. You're at the Ellensburg Rodeo. This is one of the biggest rodeos in the nation, right? Like, this is all about riding bulls and doing other country hillbilly shit. And here comes this woman who you're just like, oh yeah, look at her, she won, woo! And then she just on a dime turns and just causes this irreplaceable damage. And my eventual goal for her was to summon use those people's death there as to summon Nyarlathotep into this world to summon a plane or some sort of thing that he owned. And actually, if he had succeeded, Mission 3 would have been much more like the Annihilation series, where our agents would have been going into essentially this cordoned off black site. The Ellensburg would just basically be this dead zone, and they would be going in to figure out what happened, trying to get pieces of information. But they would be very much like this shadowy world, maybe even play off like Kadath as I did like in Mission 3, and just kind of that bleed over into them. Almost an incursion like from, I think I talked about that as well. And I really thought it was an interesting idea. And part of me was nervous to do it, because if we wanted to continue Delta Green in that timeline, you're not coming back from that. That is a huge shift at what you can do going forward. And so I'm thankful that the players didn't, but that was my ultimate goal, was to pull out that stop and watch that happen. Now, as I went through, I definitely did what the characters, I played off what the characters were doing as well. I'm not saying you can't do that. Just make sure that you have a good goal in mind for your enemies. This Cabal had that plan. They wanted to summon forth Nyarlathotep using the sacrifice from the Ellensburg Rodeo to do this. Now, Laura had her own machinations where she was going to try to use this power and kill Marissa as well and become the leader of the Covenant. I had also had some other scenes where I had an idea that Lauren's grandma was the old woman that Cody got the items from in Music from a Darkened Room, and that she was part of this cult and Covenant and knew who they were. And I was going to kind of tie that in to all of this. Is like, no, they know who you are. They know what you've gotten. But I felt it might be too much. I'd also planned a scene where they were trying to get Misha's character away and get her to, Marissa's farm, where they were going to confront her to what she was, and they were all going to kill her. Like, they were going to basically bind her in this room, cast a spell so she couldn't move, taunt her, and then kill her right there. Or try to convert her. One of the two. Wasn't quite sure how that was going to work out. But she didn't fall for those tricks either. So, I definitely, one of the failings, I think, that I didn't do a good job of was bringing the police officer back. I was trying to figure out a positive way to get the old sheriff involved, and I just couldn't figure out a good timeline or a frame to get him really interested in like where this group is and all that kind of stuff. It was tough. They did a pretty decent job of staying under the radar in the first round, so it was tough to kind of have that reasoning of why he'd be out there looking. I even thought about Marissa Crest would go to him and create some sort of a bargain or a deal, but again, I felt that might be too heavy-handed with everything. But, I mean, if you ever get the idea you want to run this, kind of based off how we did it, maybe one day I'll release the notes. Definitely something you could do. I definitely had a twist that I had planned. And that big twist was that this wasn't sanctioned by the program, that they were outlaws, that they would now be contending with actual Delta Green as they did this, as they ran into. I thought that would be kind of an interesting idea there, kind of setting it up as time went through. And I thought it did pretty well. I thought it was a really good tense standoff, and I thought it was interesting the way that played out. I thought Tyler and Jake did a fantastic job with their paranoia towards that all. It was really spot on, and I can't be more, I'm so happy it went that way. The other thing you want to make sure you do is you plan out some locations. So, for instance, when I was planning out Mission 2, I had the apartments were going to be a big thing. I had Marissa Crest's house to be safe. I had obviously her furniture store, the pub, and then I had another kind of one of the places around there, like another road or some other kind of like I'm trying to think of the term of it. The shop, the Crystal Shop was another one I kind of started coming up with these ideas of just set pieces, places that you want to go, and then start thinking about like what clues they could find at each one. So at the apartments, obviously, Cody's character was really into surveillance. I was like, okay, I should have security cameras or something that makes his character shine in that moment, that they can get information that feeds into this. And then the other time I was like, there's neighbors. There's going to be neighbors that smoking. They probably saw stuff. So I'm going to give the players the opportunity to interact with them and see if they talk to them And if they do a good enough job, they'll get that information. Obviously, Crest Furniture had a whole bunch of stuff that they didn't really get to explore. So each of these places, I just kind of gave a couple different clues of what could be found there. And obviously, in any game you're running, kind of think of it like the Quantum Ogre. If there's an opportunity for them to find that clue at a different spot, just let them find it. It doesn't have to be prescribed to those areas. Just have a kind of general idea of what information can be found there. But if they come up with a really good idea, figure out a way for it to make sense and give it to them. I mean, I think that's a great idea. Don't ever, if they have a good enough idea, you want to reward that. And so that's another kind of big thing there. Lastly, I had threats. Marissa Crest was obviously a threat. The sheriff was a threat. And I had false flags. Melissa Beck, she was never a part of this. She was just an unwitting, she was just there. She got killed, got all these moments. And so just kind of have those in mind that you can kind of play off of those characters and kind of throw them in there. And then also I wrote up a couple different key moments that I if I could hit, I wanted to know how to handle it. So I had Marissa's house. What would happen if they get her back there? The rodeo. What happens when we get to the rodeo? What are the exact sequence of events? What are they planning to do? What is their order of operation at the rodeo? So I know when the players are there, where they're going to interrupt and where they're going to hit those moments. And then I had key moments are when the program finds out about the agents. What are they going to do? What is their plan? And we saw that play out. So just a lot of stuff you can do there. And that's just kind of going through, that's mission 2, right? So I kind of put all these things together. And then spinning out of that, I didn't have a whole ton of time to come up with mission 3. But my kind of idea for mission 3 was very, very shorter than that one, because I was pretty comfortable at this point into it. I knew that going into this, I don't know why, but I really focused on a lot of places that were memorable to me in not necessarily my childhood, but in Washington. I spent a lot of time in Ocean Shores. So much of my summers were spent there from ages 9 to probably 14. My parents owned property there, so we would go there every summer, spend a week or two sleeping in a trailer, reading a ton of books, riding my bike down to the pond, fishing, all that kind of stuff that kids do, playing in the woods. And I grew to loathe Ocean Shores. I can't stand going there because I'm so tired of going there. And so I wanted to set something there. I thought it'd be interesting. It's far enough away. It's near the sea, so we can play up those Cthulhu mythos elements. We can play up a lot more of that kind of, are there going to be, elder ones coming up or deep ones or anything like that? Or maybe we start playing off of some of the other aspects of Lovecraftian horror, Maybe we got the fish-eyed people stomping around town. Wasn't quite sure what they wanted to do, but that's where we're at. And as I started to kind of go through there, I had this idea pop in my head. I was studying a lot of cult leaders when I was trying to come up with this, because I had the idea of I wanted another group. I wanted a cult. And I wanted this cult to have a really fucked up, twisted version of God. And that we would be revealed isn't actually God. Shocker. Spoiler alert. Like a lot of cults, they tend to misuse and misappropriate and taint whatever holy thing they're trying to go along with. And so that was where I started kind of going through. It's like, okay, we know that these people have fled. Where are they going? What's the plan? And at that point, I was like, okay, there's going to be another church that is tied to, Nyarlathotep. Marissa and Sharon are going to head there to kind of become part of this group, blend in, and just hopefully ride out the sunset. Unfortunately for Sharon, they demanded to outsiders, obviously, they needed proof that they were there for the reason, and Marissa sacrificed Sharon as a reason before this, to kind of set her up so that she could prove that she was there for the children of the oncoming dawn. So I took some actual spaces in Ocean Shores. Again, there's an airfield there. I took the airfield for their compound. There is a Mormon church not far down the road from there. I'd made that their church, so I knew these places growing up. I lived 2 blocks away from both of these. My parents owned property 2 blocks away from each of these places. I drove by them constantly, rode my bike. I think I skateboarded in the Mormon parking lot once. So I knew pretty well where everything was, and I had a good idea visually of how to plan this all out. And then I started trying to figure out, a lot of it to me was, what's their goal? And I like this idea that they would have these children of Nyarlathotep, these Uganach. And I was like, okay, I like this idea. Okay, like we got, kind of like a Jesus-like figure that could be born, that could impregnate this woman and come into this world and be this monster. And so I was like, okay, cool. Obviously, Sharon is a prototype of that. They gave this thing to Sharon to see if they could, if it was successful. We saw what it did to her. Perfect. We have it. Now they're going to stick it into this unfamiliar woman. Because I think that's the most terrifying aspect, is like just a random person picked off the street is just chosen, like, you're it. It's a horrifying thought to me. And so I thought that would be really terrifying. In earlier ideas, I had the idea that it would have been a cult member. And there was going to be a big thing that Erica would have been a bank teller. And essentially, if they went and talked to the bank, they'd find out that she told them all that, basically take this job and shove it. And that she was meant for more and blah, 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 blah. And there would be these clues that she would be part of this cult. And that would lead the group to investigate that. But eventually I settled on, I like the idea that she was just a random person that this security guard, Roger Kemp, picked out because he saw her, he was infatuated with her, and decided she was the one. And that's just much more terrifying to me. So in this game, I definitely had key people. We had Erica Siffs, Marshall Branham, David Felm, and Roger Kemp. These were all people that I had set out as key characters before I even sat with the characters. Obviously, Jake's father-in-law came in really big to that. And yeah, it was just really cool. For this one, I even sat down and I wrote a timeline of the events. So I had a better understanding of when things were happening. So I could give the group a better idea of everything. I would definitely say that's a good idea if you're going to be, creating a Delta Green scenario, is definitely have a chain of events and know your dates and times when everything went down. Because the players are going to want to know. They're going to want to be able to look at stuff, see if anything lines up. So make sure you have a really, you have that idea in tow and write it down. Just, I highly recommend that aspect of it. So, and I had the mission. I have the mission statement there of what they're supposed to do. We had a dark green box here for them to go explore. I used a green box generator to come up with the items. Nothing too crazy there. I was surprised the Nazi gold thing became something. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah, and then I created locations, and I had clues there. Erica's house. We know there's going to be signs of a break-in. We'll say there might be some footprints. There's going to be something there because these people aren't experts. They don't know what they're doing. They're brainwashed people acting. We had the bank. Obviously, you go there, talk with the employees. That would have led to something about Roger. We had Roger's house, all that kind of stuff. Again, roommate, figuring that all out. We had the compound itself. Not a whole ton there, but there were secret rooms, there was security and stuff like that. So obviously, they didn't get a whole lot to explore. There was the church itself, those kind of things, and the green box were kind of the locations I made sure I had different clues planned out for as well. And then I just wrote my intro. I kind of had my idea. This was especially interesting to me because bringing in Jake's character as a not Delta Green, as just a normal person, and having to play with those agents versus him, I loved that aspect. I thought this was probably our strongest arc that we did when it came to that. I thought it was such a cool how the story played out, them meeting and like the uneasiness between them, Jake's untrustworthiness of them, and playing especially in a closed game where he didn't know what they were doing. And Jake is so dedicated to these games. He will not listen to anything that he's not a part of. So if he's listening to an episode for a recap, he skips through until he hears his stuff so he knows what he knows. And I love that about him. He's amazing in that sense. So, yeah. A lot of it was that. Just trying to figure out the two different pathways and when I could get them to meet up. And again, when it felt natural. That's the hardest thing, is getting that kind of meeting point to feel like it means, and you're not like ham-fisting it in there trying to make sense of everything. So, yeah. And from there, it's just, ducking and weaving. What are they going to do? I knew for a fact as I was doing this, a couple, again, key moments I wanted to have. I wanted them to find this creature and have to figure out what they were going to do. Originally, I planned for it to get out and try to attack them or run away and get into the water and they might have to search for it. Didn't go that route. So the other key thing I wanted to hit was I wanted them to go to Kadath. I wanted to have a bridge to those worlds. And I thought that would be a surreal experience for them to go. And I was so happy we got to get to that point. And then lastly, the big one, the one that kind of kicked this whole thing off for me, probably the biggest influence for this story was the Void. And there's a scene in the Void where they're in a hospital and they look out and there's just a sea of cultists, all in these white robes with these black triangles on their face, holding knives, standing outside, and it's amazingly terrifying and great. And I wanted that scene. We have something similar to that. And I had that image of like, okay, they're going to rescue this pregnant woman or rescue the sacrifice. They're going to get her to a hotel. The power's going to get cut off. The nurse is going to be in on it, and they're going to show up, and they're going to have to figure out how they're going to save this woman from these people coming through the door. Worked out, ended up being at a police station, whereas it was, but hey, that was definitely a key moment that I wanted to have, and I'm glad we got to hit to it. So, yeah, I mean, it's a lot to sit down, and if you've never run anything before, I get that it can be overwhelming to sit down and kind of start thinking things out, but the easiest thing to do is just start thinking, what's your premise? Where does it take place? How did it start? Where are they at now? How do you beat it? What's the end game? How do you win this scenario? Do you win this scenario? There's a game that I got to run for some folks for a shotgun scenario I'm creating, which is about this parasite that infects your brain that makes you believe that you've met this person, you've known them all your life. And how do you beat that? So I've been, tailoring it and trying to work out those scenarios, and it's been a lot of fun. So, I mean, yeah, just the easiest thing I could say to you is just find inspiration in something that you've liked and just start there. Like I said, for Mission 3, a big part of it was The Void. I fucking love that movie. And so I wanted to take The Void and like, how can I twist it enough to make it my idea and go from there? Vice versa, jumping over The Traveler, a big part for me as we sat down and created this world was I loved a comic called Fear Agent. And there's a moment in Fear Agent that essentially is the birth of the humanity and our version of Traveler getting to the stars. There's these two alien species. They end up fighting on Earth. They do a whole shit ton of damage. And this Galactic Federation feels so bad that they bring the human beings back into, basically bring them up into, the Galactic Empire. And there's like 7 human beings left in the world, and they're just fighting to survive. And I love that idea. And I started to kind of develop my own separate RPG idea out of that originally, which was, as we talked about in Traveler, as we've set up in our kind of backstory, there is a robot faction that realizes that destroying all humanity is not good, and that they feel they deserve something for what's happened to them. And so I took the idea of the World Mind, I believe it is, from the Nova series, where at one point Richard Rider is the only Nova left, and he's got the entire data World Mind in his of the Nova Core in his mind in his suit, and he's able to have these powers, and it's doing all these things and helping him compute all this stuff. And I thought, you know what? That'd be a cool idea if that chose a group of people to lead the existence of humanity forward after this cataclysmic event. And so it started spiraling from there of, okay, 12 people are the chosen ones. Give you a little wiggle room in case characters die. You guys are taught instantaneously through this World Mind. Maybe there's a ship. They teach you how to fly this ship. They show you everything. They convert all the languages for you on how to get this ship up in the air. They teach you everything, and you blast off. And what follows that group? Where do they go? What's their plan? What unfolds out of that? And I thought it was a really interesting idea to take that and twist it enough to where it's kind of an original idea, but it's also not. And so I kind of tweaked that a little bit more in Traveler, where I had the separate groups who built these ships that went out to the stars, and now they've started to propagate and spread out humanity, and now we're far in the future, and now we see the ramifications of that. And that was kind of the reasoning, the impetus for starting that Traveler game the way I did, is I really liked that idea. I'm still new to Traveler, and so planning stuff for that is kind of different than what I'm doing for Delta Green. It's much more, I don't want to say loosey-goosey, because that would be disrespectful to me in the time I put into this. But I'm really trying to play off of what the characters are giving me. And so my ideas are essentially, I have factions that are moving, and those factions have things they're doing. And again, if the players are going to interact with them, cool. If not, then that's fine. But I want those factions to be tied into the characters as well. Now that we've gotten out of this kind of first, I don't want to say tutorial, but think of it as like the tutorial world of like an RPG. You've completed your first mission. Now the open world has began. And that was a really big thing for me, as we recorded this. Originally, the plan was we were going to make characters and give me about 2 weeks to sit down and come up with an idea for how to do this. And we didn't have that time. We ended up not being able to record the day we wanted to. And so I had to create the beginning of this campaign directly after we made characters. And so I had backup plans because I'm just the way I am. I started basically looking at every form of traveler, or I guess every group of traveler could pick. And I was like, okay, I need to have some sort of a starting idea for each of these. And they were pretty wide ranged. And it just depended on what they wanted to do. I had an idea for a ship just appearing in the middle of space outside of these planets. And the group has to go explore, figure out where the ship came from. Like it just like blinks into existence. And I had this whole idea of like stargates and exploring other worlds and stuff like that, because I was really, really listening to a lot of Blood Incantation at the time and like exploring out what it is to be human in this galaxy and stuff like that. And I was like, might be a little too much. Another idea I had was, I was trying to get away from the horror aspect of it, but I had the other idea of them coming back and finding this, this thing was abandoned. But maybe it wasn't abandoned. Maybe these people were cocooned somewhere and there's an alien on the thing that they got to fight and save the crew from. Didn't know. My other idea was that they would show up and it would just be like a normal day on the ship, except for time would fluctuate. Like they would see someone walk past their door, and then 2 minutes later, the person would walk past their door, and there would be these kind of weird ebb and flows of time that they were caught in. And it really came from reading this book, part of this book called The Last Watch, which deals with that. It's essentially the space station at the edge of human space between them and this evil, other group of people. But the area between them has like time fluxes. So when they flare up like sun flares, they'll hit this station, and they'll actually see events happen in reverse or in time. And that was a really cool idea, but I'm not smart enough to figure out time travel, and so I didn't want to fuck with it, because as I probably mentioned on the show, I don't know a lot about sci-fi stuff. I have never been a big sci-fi guy, and I've started getting into sci-fi. As I record this, I've listened to Hyperion, I finished Children of Dune, I finished Dune Messiah. I've started Armor, and I'm halfway through Children of Dune right now. So I'm trying to get a lot of sci-fi, trying to get more into my system so I have a better idea of what I'm doing. But that's the reason I really wanted to run Traveler, was to challenge myself to go into stories I'm not comfortable with. And I know a lot of sci-fi stuff can just be, tell a fantasy story, but take out the magic and put tech in, or, they're fighting space rats instead of normal rats. But I didn't want to do that. A big part for me was I wanted the story to feel more grounded. I didn't want to have a lot of fantastical elements to it. And ultimately, the reason I picked the story I started with was it's got a good central mystery to me, and I could build off of it because I knew the characters coming out of this weren't squeaky clean. They were characters who had past. I mean, Misha's character loved to gamble, and Cody's character was a trader, probably did some illegal trading. We have Jake's character who is, doing modifications, whether they're up on the up and up, we're not 100% sure. And then we have Tyler's character who's pretty straight and narrow. And I thought the idea of throwing him into this world of potential corruption, seeing how his character would handle that, would be kind of an interesting thought. And so as we went, I just started to kind of plot out. It's like, okay, here's the plan. As I put this together, I said, here's the time frame we have. Here's the events that happened. Here's why they happened. Here are the groups at play. How do they interact with these pieces? And from there, I just started kind of going with the flow of things. And I definitely had concrete ideas of like where they could find information, how they could find information. But I still, again, if they had a good idea, I would give them that information. And I think a big part for me is I need things to make sense as I explain them. And so a lot of my stories have to have at least some sort of a logical link. Whether they're right or wrong, there has to be a logical link or a logical leap that someone makes to get this to do. So it made absolute sense that there'd be two people who would be like, yeah, man, we'll definitely take this money to look the other way as you go make drugs on this planet. We'll figure out a way to get you down there because no one's going to be down there. And rightfully so. It's a stupid idea. Like, why would you risk all of that just to make drugs? But if the money's good enough, the money's good enough. And, I don't think Slad and them cared enough about that aspect of it, because if they get caught, they can just burn it down and leave. No harm off them. As long as they got their product, they're good. So, yeah, that's kind of how I'm approaching building Traveler scenarios right now is I really want to have a solid plan, a solid group, a solid idea, and then see how they interact with that. But I also want their input as well. And I'm really trying to push them to that aspect of like, this is your story now. The previous episode to me was the end of that chapter. And we're starting the second chapter that's going to be largely driven by them and where they want to go. And I'm having ideas for stuff set up. But, yeah, a lot of it's just that. It's trying to understand the system, how it works, understand the world and how it works, and kind of throw what I think is an interesting idea at them and see how they go. I'm still definitely not fully invested. That's not the proper term. I'm not fully comfortable with Traveler yet when it comes to creating scenarios. I've read a bunch of them, and I'm trying to understand how things work and how they're generally laid out. Not necessarily that I'm going to do it that way, but just to understand like what other people are doing. So I have a good kind of starting point of like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Or, yeah, maybe that idea isn't a good idea. Or maybe that's too much combat. If we haven't hit combat yet. And, it's something I think is going to come eventually. But I want it to feel natural. I don't want to feel forced. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to do. Is I know I have a tendency that I want that first session I run to be like, have that impact moment that hooks them. And I feel like I will sacrifice telling the story to get to that point. And that's something I need to work on as a GM. I'll speed through things to get to that point because I'm just like, yeah, that shit's dope. And that's not always good. Let it come naturally. Let it hit that point. Let it have that much impact. Because if you rush to it, if you don't have the buy-in for it, it's not going to hit as well as you want to. And I think that's for any game that you're trying to plan, is that. So, I hope that was worth it to y'all to listen. My biggest takeaways from all of this would just be learn the system you're running. Kind of look through, study what other people are doing. I read plenty of Delta Green scenarios to kind of get an idea for this. I read shotgun scenarios. I read other people's stuff. I listened to Stories and Lies was a big thing. Sleeping Low. As I kind of went through and listened as I grew, I listened to what other people were doing. It's like, oh, that's a cool idea. I'm going to make sure I kind of held that in my back pocket for next time. And that's just kind of how it goes. You're going to learn through osmosis. You're going to take ideas. You're going to run with them. No one has an original idea anymore, it seems. So that's fine. You don't have to have the most original idea. Have your party meet in a tavern. That's fine. Just make it fun. As long as everyone's having fun at the table, that's the only thing that matters. And that includes you as the GM. You need to be having fun too. And I know that you're typically the last person looked at. I know sometimes I feel that way, that, my fun is my fun is the least important one. As long as everyone else is having fun. But I want to have those moments too, where I get to have a little bit of time. I want that moment. That's something I've been trying to work on as I've run more games of like, no, if I'm going to run something, I want to run it because I'm excited for it. Like Mothership. I fucking love Mothership. I want to run Mothership every day of my life if I could. It is fantastic. And yeah, and I love running it. So it's a fun time for me to do. And that just makes it cool. So, yeah. I guess I'll take the last couple minutes here to kind of talk about the podcast in general, because I'm just rambling here. We have seen the largest growth of this podcast this past month. As I'm recording this, it is the last day of January, and we have amassed, I think we are at roughly, if I'm doing my numbers right, we're at about 2,700 downloads just for this month. Almost 2,800 downloads for this month. That's ridiculous to me. And that's because of all of you. And I thank you so much for continuing to listen to our show, sitting down at our table, having fun, listening to me and a bunch of yahoos play a game and hopefully delight you and be funny and be authentic and make you feel like you're one of us. Because at the end of the day, we're all the same. We're all having fun. We're all in this community together, playing games and being goofballs and just enjoying time with friends, playing a game. And I think that's the hardest thing for people to realize is, you don't have to dress up. You don't have to have a voice for your character. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Just sit down, play with your friends, and have fun. That's where it begins. And if you want to add that other stuff, do it. But you don't have to bring that day one. It's not a requirement for doing any of this. So, looking at the future of the podcast, we're definitely working on getting some other games systems played this year. Right now, we're looking at doing a fantasy system. I'm in talks with another podcast to potentially run it with them as kind of a 4-shot offshoot like we did with Mothership, as we did with Stories and Lies. And I also want to run some Down Darker Trails, because I really want to try Call of Cthulhu, so that's going to be on the docket. And I kind of want to do something cyberpunky, or something like that. I just want to try something new. So we're going to definitely try to do fantasy. We're going to try to do Western, and we're going to try to do another kind of sci-fi, but not this, maybe like a more campy sci-fi. That's kind of, I want to do more Mothership too. I definitely want to try to get with Stories and Lies guys and work something out where we're playing with them. So yeah, be on the lookout for all of that coming forward or going forward, whatever terminology you want to fucking use there. I'm not going to tell you live your life. So I'm talking for over 40 minutes, rambling like a madman. And I hope this has made sense. I hope it's been interesting to you. I don't know really what else to say, except for thank you for listening to this, to listening to all our episodes, for sharing us, telling your friends, leaving reviews, being a Patreon member. It means a lot. This is the first podcast I've ever done that I felt really, really accomplished with. That I felt like the end product being put out was what I envisioned it from day one. The audio quality, all of those things. It's been really cool, and it's been awesome to see the reception we've gotten and the friends and the camaraderie we've had with other people. And it's just cool. And I love helping this community. I love being a part of it. If you have interest in doing a podcast, hit me up. Find me. I'm on Discord. I'm Totoro's Bang Bus. Reach out. Let's talk. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions with you. I'm not going to gatekeep anything. If you're interested in doing this, I'll help you, tell you what gear we have, try to help you figure out how to set it up, all that kind of stuff. This is how we build a community. This is how we grow. That's huge to me. And that's all I got. So I hope you guys have a great day wherever you're at listening to this. I'm going to be in Las Vegas when this comes out at a volleyball tournament. Not for me, but for my niece. And I'm hoping she's kicking ass and winning. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great day.